On to the characters. I found the characters of this show to be the most confusing part. I'll flat out say that aside from Giorgio, Stamets, and maybe Lorca, I couldn't get into any of them. In the beginning, they were all annoying or abrasive, but then they would steadily improve, showing signs of becoming better people, and somehow revert back to their original crap selves. Take Saru. He was a scaredy cat and honestly not a person to be a second in command of a starship. If his species can't control their fear, like he obviously couldn't in the very beginning, then they can't command. I'm sorry, it's just part of being a commander that you cannot run away in fear all the time. He actually overcomes this and becomes a capable officer. That is, until aliens take his fear away for a second and he completely flips out. He literally kicks the crap out of Michael like a horse and almost causes the failure of a mission that could have solved the war problem. Then there's the darn security officer who doesn't matter because she was stupid enough to get eaten because she tried to attack a monster that she saw had obliterated the crew of the USS Glenn. At least she died temporarily. There's Tilly, who I couldn't care either way for, although she did squander the first F-bomb in Star Trek in the most forced way possible. I could mention the rest of the crew, but even Mayweather from Enterprise contributed more than the rest of the Discovery crew did. For the meat and potatoes, there's Michael Burnham. She was so nerve-grating in the beginning that her going to prison could have been one of the best series finales I've ever seen, and that's just on episode 2. What's worse is that she could have been called justified for her actions because the Klingons were going to attack anyway. The problem is that there was no way of knowing for sure, and the Federation tends not to shoot first. She didn't start the war, but she sure as hell made sure to escalate it. In fact, she may have very well have caused the war, or at least caused the war to explode like it did, by killing T'Kuvma and making him a martyr. The only reason this may not have led to war was because we found out that the Klingons weren't united until Kor somehow managed to unite them, or something. Really, it seemed that it didn't make any difference, since they eventually started carving up the Federation to compensate for everyone's small ridges anyway. But back to Michael, who eventually would go on to become more Starfleet-like by the end of the series. She didn't like the idea of destroying an entire planet just to win a war, which is admirable. It could have been done without letting go of a mass murderer because of your emotions, but there are points for compassion there. I suppose I don't even mind her by the end of the season, save for the annoying and cheesy monologue. The biggest gripe I have right now is that for being the only mutineer in Starfleet right now, along with now being the Deus Ex savior of the Federation, somehow she's never brought up between Kirk and Spock later in the franchise. We are told that future episodes will explain everything, although I find this to be a feeble attempt to pass the buck down the road rather than a legitimate explanation. While I can understand that not everything will be explained right now, I have to revert back to the recent Star Wars The Last Jedi movie as an example of why we can't expect things to be explained. Say what you want about the movie, either it's good, it's bad, or whatever, but because Rian Johnson was not J.J. Abrams, there was no explanation on the Knights of Ren, there was a cop-out on Rey's parents, and a let-down death for Snoke, and admittedly Luke. The same can happen with Discovery. Now, another character I did enjoy was Stamets, and that was something that built throughout the series. He was annoying at first, but he grew. Not only that, but I will say that he is exactly what I would want in a gay character in Star Trek. That is, a gay character who doesn't come on the stage and shout, "I am gay and you will like it," but rather a character who is a character first, and one of their traits just happens to be that they're gay. This was something that I really liked about the original series. Uhura was a communications officer first, and a young black female was part of her, but it didn't solely define her. Daystrom was of African descent, but that was never mentioned. In fact, I don't know if he's African American, or actual African, or British or German, or Chinese. Maybe he grew up in China. What he was, first and foremost, was a leading scientist in the Federation. The list goes on, but when talking about Stamets, I want to know that he is a person, and not that he's just a gay character thrown in. And that's another thing that I think I can give Discovery points for, is that for people trying to say that's SJW propaganda, I didn't feel that as much about Discovery as I thought I would. Regardless as to whether Michael is a Mary Sue or not, it's not specifically mentioned that she's doing it because she's a female. Now, it's something that I know Doctor Who has been toying with, all these jokes against men, like Clara when she was on the Viking ship, talking about there's enough testosterone around the universe. But back on Discovery, there wasn't a big thing about Michael Burnham being black, or her being female. They were just characters that happened to be female or whatever. And as far as the males on the show go, Lorca was not a bad captain. And then there's Ash Tyler, who was a capable officer, it's just he had PTSD, which is understandable, and that he was a Klingon masquerading as a human. I'm sure that's confusing enough for anyone. Another character that was good was Giorgio, at least the captain version of her. She was a true Starfleet captain. She just had a poor choice in first officers. The Empress Giorgio was okay too, and her fight scenes were cool, and at first her character seemed pretty interesting. However, she turned into kind of a cartoon on the last episode or so, blabbering about genocide or doing what is necessary, and finally, there's Captain Lorca, who also was a cool captain in a kind of badass in an anti-hero kind of way, until he turned out to be a mere version of Lorca. He would have been more interesting as a war captain who was conflicted by previous losses while working to save humanity, rather than a guy just trying to take over the Terran Empire. And he too felt like a cartoon at the end, a ripoff of The Empire Strikes Back and wanting Burnham to join him. For the aesthetics of the show, the look was not too bad. Yes, it was technologically advanced and the holograms were kind of stupid. But the ship interior looked decent enough for a ship that was younger than the Constitution class. I guess it harkened back to Enterprise in some ways, especially in the engineering section where they had the tardigrade. The ship itself looked clunky though, although it might have had to do with being based off a rejected concept for the refitted Enterprise. At least they got rid of those weird frills between the two hulls in the saucer section, like what was originally released for this show. However, the spinning pieces on the saucer was kind of out of place because just why? Enough people complained about Voyagers and the cells moving, but those could at least be justified as a way to form a more stable warp bubble. Also, the ship still looked like CGI. I'm sorry, but occasional shots of the actual ship shouldn't look worse than a video game. And the few times that we get off-ship, the scenes look like simple camera filters or a damn cave. Seriously, we've seen the council chamber before. Why is it a cave now? Why the hell are the Klingons turning into Kazon? At least the Kazon probably had proper buildings. The Klingon ships, which are at least once specifically named as the D7, were nothing like any Klingon ships we've ever seen. In fact, they might be more 90s punk versions of Romulan ships. Finally, continuity. As I mentioned, the people behind Discovery have assured us, the audience, that everything will be explained later, to which I say that they better not have staff changes anytime soon. But to have such things as the Spore Drive, which anyone should be able to eventually access, including the board, as well as a massive war with an almost invasion of Earth, logical terrorists, and the existence of Michael Burnham as an adopted sister to Spock, it's hard to think of a proper way to explain how the show should fit into the timeline we know and love. And if it turns out to be a different timeline again, such as the Kelvin timeline, then what's the point of watching it if you're a fan of the old show? Everything you know and love is subject to change. I know Rick and Morty had multiple universes, but we follow one specific set of characters and care only about them. We need to, or else there would be no consequences and no reason to follow any one show. Anything could happen and anything could change. Your knowledge would be irrelevant. Anyway, so those are my thoughts. Please feel free to leave comments below. I'd like to know what you think.